A small island right next to Florida, Cuba has always been closely watched by the United States. In 1959, a revolution put Fidel Castro in power, and Cuba became a communist country. The Cuban government then took over U.S.-owned businesses, land, and property without paying the owners, which caused major anger in the United States. Because Cuba was now communist and close to the Soviet Union, the U.S. began to see Cuba as a serious enemy, far too close to its own borders. In 1961, Cuban exiles tried to overthrow Castro with U.S. support. However, the mission failed and even strengthened Castro's power on the island. 1 year later, the Soviet Union placed nuclear missiles in Cuba, pointing directly at the United States. This caused 13 days of extreme tension, but both sides eventually backed down. The Soviets removed the missiles, and the Americans promised not to invade Cuba. Despite this peace, the US created a full trade embargo on Cuba, meaning they completely stopped all trade with the island. The main goal was to create economic pressure that would weaken Cuba's communist government. However, not only did it hurt Cuba's economy, but Cuba also claimed it damaged the everyday life of its people. The embargo has lasted for more than 60 years and is still active today, making it one of the longest-running sanctions in modern history. In the 50s, Iran's Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh nationalized the country's oil industry, which extremely annoyed Britain and the US. They wanted to put the Shah in charge instead, so they overthrew Mossadegh. From 1953 to 1979, the US strongly supported the Shah's government, giving weapons, money, and other support, making him a close ally. Iranian people, however, absolutely despised the Shah's corrupt government, which led to the huge Islamic Revolution in 1979. Iran overthrew the Shah and created a new religious government led by Ayatollah Khomeini. Later that year, Iranian students took 52 Americans hostage at the US Embassy for a brutal 444 days. This event completely destroyed relations between the two countries and cut all diplomatic ties. From the 1980s onward, the US placed numerous sanctions on Iran, accusing it of supporting terrorism and destabilizing the region. In the 1990s and 2000s, the US even increased those sanctions, especially as Iran expanded its nuclear program and became an even bigger concern. In 2015, Iran and world powers signed a nuclear deal to limit Iran's nuclear activities. 10 years later, in 2025, Iran declared the nuclear agreement expired and officially over. ISIS is a violent extremist group that wanted to create its own Islamic country, or caliphate, ruled by strict religious laws. The group began in Iraq after the US invasion in 2003, when a militant named Abu Musab al-Zarqawi started attacking US soldiers, the Iraqi government, and Shia civilians. Even though Zarqawi was killed, the group survived, moved into Syria during the Civil War, and eventually renamed itself ISIS. In 2014, the group grew extremely fast, capturing large parts of Iraq and Syria, including big cities like Mosul and Raqqa. That same year, they declared a caliphate and chose Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi as their leader. ISIS became known for horrible violence, mass killings, beheadings, sexual slavery, and attacks on minorities. The group also used social media to recruit thousands of foreign fighters from countries all over the world and organized terrorist attacks in cities like Paris, Manchester, or Istanbul. This had to be stopped. In response, the US formed a large international coalition. With airstrikes and special forces troops, they pushed ISIS back and killed al-Baghdadi in one of their raids. Even though the US still targets ISIS, the group is far weaker than at their peak. Another well-known terrorist organization that has been a major US enemy in modern history is Al-Qaeda. It is a global terrorist group formed in the late 1980s by the famously known Osama bin Laden and other fighters who had just fought the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Their goal was to spread a violent form of jihad, remove US influence from the Middle East, and overthrow un-Islamic governments. They officially turned against the United States in the 1990s, accusing the US of supporting corrupt Muslim governments and stationing troops in Saudi Arabia. In 1998, they bombed American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, and 2 years later, the USS Cole was destroyed in a suicide attack. However, the group became America's biggest enemy after the 9/11 attacks in 2001, when Al-Qaeda hijackers flew planes into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, killing nearly 3,000 people. A militant group that started in the early 1990s in Afghanistan. Most of its fighters were religious students who wanted to bring strict Islamic law to the country. Similar to ISIS and Al-Qaeda, they wanted to take over their country. So by 1996, the Taliban took over most of Afghanistan and created the Islamic Emirate. Their rule was extremely strict, especially toward women, minorities, and literally anyone who opposed them. The Taliban also allowed Al-Qaeda to live and train in Afghanistan. After the 9/11 attacks in 2001, the US demanded the Taliban hand over Osama bin Laden. However, they refused. Because of this, the US invaded Afghanistan in October 2001, aiming to destroy Al-Qaeda and completely remove the Taliban from power. At first, the US and its allies quickly pushed the Taliban out of major cities and set up a new Afghan government. Even after this, the Taliban managed to regroup and fight back with bombings and ambushes. The US-Taliban conflict dragged for years, including other allies like Canada. In 2021, the US fully left Afghanistan, and the Afghan government collapsed within days. The Taliban quickly retook Kabul and returned to power. In the 1980s, Iraq was ruled by Saddam Hussein, a strict and aggressive dictator with a powerful military. In the 80s, Iraq fought a long war with Iran that lasted 8 years. During this time, the US actually supported Iraq because America saw Iran as the bigger threat after the Iranian Revolution in '79. After the war ended, not really surprisingly, Iraq was deeply in debt. In 1990, Saddam invaded Kuwait, hoping to grab its oil and money. This made Iraq an immediate US enemy. They formed a huge international coalition to force Saddam out. In 1991, the Gulf War pushed Iraqi forces out of Kuwait and put Iraq under heavy sanctions. Saddam stayed in power throughout the 90s, but relations with the US got much worse. The US accused Iraq of hiding weapons of mass destruction, WMDs, and breaking UN rules. In 2003, the US invaded Iraq, claiming Saddam was dangerous and might use WMDs, which were never found. The invasion quickly removed Saddam from power. However, after Saddam's fall, Iraq collapsed into absolute chaos. Sunni and Shia groups fought each other in a brutal sectarian war. The country became poor, demolished, and full of terrorist groups, including an early version of ISIS. The US spent years trying to rebuild Iraq's government and train its army, but instability remained. The famous conflict with Vietnam was caused again by the mighty political ideology the US always despised: communism. After World War II, Vietnam split into two parts: North Vietnam, which was communist, led by Ho Chi Minh, and South Vietnam, which was anti-communist and supported by the US. Americans were scared that communism would spread across Asia via the domino theory, so it strongly supported South Vietnam with money, weapons, and military advisors. In the South, a communist guerrilla group called the Viet Cong formed. They were supported by North Vietnam and used guerrilla warfare, tunnels, and surprise attacks to weaken the South Vietnamese government. By 1965, the US sent massive numbers of troops, more than 500,000 at the war's peak, and bombed North Vietnam heavily. The war became brutal. Lasting over 19 years, the US withdrew all troops in 1975, while communists captured the city of Saigon and eventually reunified all of Vietnam under communism. After the Second World War, Korea was split into North, communists supported by the Soviet Union and China, and South, supported by the US. Pretty much the same situation as Vietnam. In 1950, North Korea invaded the South, starting the Korean War. The US and UN Army defended South Korea. The war ended in 1953 with an armistice, not a peace treaty, meaning the conflict technically never ended, so America has kept troops in South Korea ever since. North Korea has become extremely isolated and hostile toward the states, blaming them for dividing the peninsula, and they still don't have official diplomatic relations. In the 90s, however, North Korea began developing nuclear weapons. Yeah, not the best way to become friends with the US. A deal in 1994 temporarily stopped their program, but it collapsed in the early 2000s. North Korea then withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and openly used nuclear weapons. Since 2006, they have conducted multiple nuclear tests and developed long-range missiles, some capable of reaching North America. The situation now is complicated. North Korea wants to be accepted as a nuclear-armed state, and the US refuses to recognize this. Their border with the South is heavily militarized, and it's not really a calm place to live. In 1949, China became a communist country led by Mao Zedong, which immediately put it on the opposite side of the United States during the Cold War. How surprising. These two huge countries even fought directly in the previously mentioned Korean War. The US did not officially recognize Communist China and supported Taiwan instead, but in the 70s, things pretty much changed. President Nixon visited China in 1972, opening the door to better relations because both countries saw a bigger threat: the Soviet Union. In 1979, the US officially recognized the People's Republic of China and began a new era of trade and limited cooperation which would economically help both countries. However, after China launched major economic reforms via cheap manufacturing and huge exports, they started catching up. As China grew, competition with the US increased. Today, the two countries fight over trade, technology, military, and Taiwan, the biggest chip manufacturer in the world. Since the majority of US enemies in modern history were because of communism, who else could take the #1 spot other than the Soviet Union? The mighty land of capitalism versus the mighty land of communism. At the end of World War II, they went from allies to rivals almost immediately. The USSR spread communism across Eastern Europe, while the US, however, tried to stop it. This dispute marked the beginning of the well-known Cold War. Even though they never fought directly, they had numerous conflicts like the Berlin blockade, the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, fighting in Afghanistan, and more. Each time, the two countries were supporting opposite sides. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was falling behind economically. Shortages, weak industry, and political problems were everywhere, while America, on the other hand, became absolutely #1 in economics. The Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, tried to fix things with reform, but those changes weakened the system even more. In the 80s, country by country broke free from Soviet control. For example, Czechoslovakia in 1989. In 1991, the Soviet Union officially collapsed. It broke into 15 new independent countries, including Russia, Ukraine, Baltics, and others. The Cold War ended, and the US became the world's only superpower. Who do you think is the biggest US enemy in modern history? Write it in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next video.